There was a moment at the very dawn of human history when the first of mankind, Adam, peace be upon him, stood not in ignorance but in direct awareness. He was not discovering truth through speculation. He was taught by the divine himself. He spoke with his Lord, received knowledge without intermediaries, and witnessed realities beyond what later generations would even imagine. From that clarity, he descended to the earth and established a way of life rooted in complete submission. The earliest human community did not debate the existence of one ultimate authority. It lived within that certainty. Yet what followed was not a continuation of that purity, but a gradual distortion. Over generations, that clarity dimmed, and what replaced it was not merely forgetfulness, but fragmentation. It was as if humanity had been given a head start in truth, only to squander it willingly, spreading confusion across civilizations without a single messenger sent to interrupt their descent for a time. Across distant lands, from the temples of ancient Egypt to the philosophies of ancient Greece and the structured power of Roman Empire, and even into the traditions of ancient China, a similar pattern emerged. People constructed elaborate systems of worship, not centered on a single absolute authority, but on a network of competing powers. These systems were not random. They reflected a worldview where control was divided. Every force of nature, every aspect of life, was assigned to a specific deity. But none of these beings held complete dominion. Figures like Zeus or Poseidon were imagined as powerful, yet flawed, limited, and often in conflict with one another. This was not true lordship. It was a hierarchy of dependency. The idea that one being could possess unrestricted authority over all existence had been replaced by a council of powers, each bound by its own limits. In reality, what many perceived as divine were unseen entities, often linked to the realm of the jinn, whose influence was mistaken for ultimate control. When Ibrahim, peace be upon him, entered this world, he did not step into neutrality. He stepped into a global system already saturated with this fragmented belief. His people had preserved a form of monotheism, somewhat shielded from the surrounding chaos. But that isolation would not last. They were on the verge of encountering civilizations deeply entrenched in idol worship, particularly as they moved toward the powerful domain of Egypt. There, authority was not only political, but also spiritual, embodied in rulers who claimed divine status. The pharaohs did not merely govern, they positioned themselves within this false structure of power, reinforcing the illusion that control belonged to many rather than one. The confrontation that followed, especially through the mission of Musa, peace be upon him, was not simply a clash of individuals, but a dismantling of an entire worldview. The plagues that struck Egypt were not random acts of punishment. Each one directly challenged a specific belief. When people relied on a deity associated with beauty and perfection, their bodies were afflicted with painful boils, disfiguring their appearance and exposing the limits of that supposed power. When they trusted forces linked to nature, those very elements turned against them. The message was precise. Anything that cannot maintain control over its own domain cannot be worthy of devotion. Their gods failed, not because they were weak in comparison, but because they were never absolute to begin with. This method of confrontation was consistent across prophetic missions. When Elijah, peace be upon him, addressed those who had turned toward the worship of Baal, he did not argue through abstract philosophy. Instead, he created a direct test. 2 offerings were placed, and the claim was simple: whichever is truly backed by divine authority will manifest power. The outcome exposed the emptiness of false devotion. These demonstrations were not spectacles, they were revelations. They stripped away illusion and forced people to confront a reality they had avoided. If something requires assistance, competes with others, or fails under pressure, it cannot be the ultimate source of existence. The ancient world, therefore, was not merely a collection of cultures, but a unified pattern of misguidance. It operated under the assumption that power was distributed among many, each controlling fragments of reality. Prophets were sent not just to guide behavior, but to correct this foundational error. They reintroduced the concept of absolute lordship, a reality where authority is not shared, divided, or negotiated. This was the essence of what had been lost. Yet alongside this visible structure of idols and temples existed another layer of influence. Unseen beings, particularly from the realm of jinn, played a role in reinforcing these systems. They possessed abilities beyond human capacity in certain aspects, which made them appear worthy of reverence. However, their knowledge was not complete. Before a certain point in history, they could access fragments of information about future events, which they passed to human intermediaries. These intermediaries, often seen as priests or shamans, gained influence by presenting this knowledge as divine insight. Kings relied on them, decisions were shaped by them, and societies were built around their claims. But this interaction was never pure. For every truth conveyed, multiple falsehoods were embedded within it. The accuracy of a single prediction would grant credibility, while the hidden deceptions would lead entire communities into chaos. This manipulation was not accidental, it was intentional. These unseen forces did not seek to guide humanity, but to mislead and degrade it. Their objective was not worship in a noble sense, but control through confusion. With the arrival of Muhammad, peace be upon him, a decisive shift occurred. The access that these beings once had to higher knowledge was cut off. The skies were no longer open for eavesdropping. What they once used as a tool to deceive was removed entirely. From that point onward, their claims lost all reliability. They could no longer mix fragments of truth with layers of lies. They were left only with fabrication. This change altered the structure of human belief systems. Without access to even partial truth, their influence weakened significantly. At the same time, divine revelation spread more widely and more clearly. The message of absolute oneness was not confined to isolated groups, but became a dominant framework across large parts of the world. This did not eliminate deviation entirely, but it limited the extent to which false systems could dominate globally as they once had. Humanity entered a different phase, one where the tools of deception were reduced and the clarity of guidance was amplified. Understanding this transformation is essential when reflecting on earlier narratives. Without recognizing the environment in which these events occurred, they can appear simplistic or symbolic. But in reality, they represent a profound shift in how humanity interacted with both the seen and unseen worlds. What once seemed like a world governed by multiple competing forces was revealed to be a misunderstanding of a single, absolute authority. The difference between past and present is not merely technological or cultural. It is structural. The mechanisms that once allowed deception to thrive on a massive scale have been restricted. The spread of revelation has created boundaries that did not exist before. While individuals may still deviate, the global dominance of those ancient systems has been broken. What remains is a clearer distinction between truth and falsehood, one that no longer relies on hidden knowledge or mystical intermediaries, but on a direct and preserved message that continues to define the path forward.